They tied her to a post in the middle of the arena. Thick chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles. The metal burned her skin. She tried to stay on her feet, but her legs trembled. The heat from the twin suns above made the air shimmer like glass. Looked around the arena was a giant pit carved into red rock. Tall black walls surrounded her. Crowds of Velgrath nobles filled the stands above. Thousands of them. Their bodies tall and sharp, their skin smooth and silver like polished stone. Their eyes black with no light inside. They were not watching a girl. They were watching a game. She looked no older than 19, maybe 20. Her skin was pale with a slight silver hue. Her hair was long, tangled, and black with streaks of gray. She was dirty and thin, but her eyes were clear, and those eyes were not Velgrathi, were human. The crowd began to chant. They stomped their boots. They clanged weapons against metal. They roared her name like a curse. Laura, she had been dragged out here an hour ago, beaten, spat on, mocked by alien guards. They told her it was time to prove her worth, time to entertain the Dominion. She begged them to stop. They only laughed. They said she was a half-breed mistake, a child born from filth. Her blood was poison. Her face was shame. Lyra did not know who her mother was. She had been raised in the slave camp since birth, but she always felt something inside her chest. A pull, a whisper now as she stood tied to the post. She could hear that whisper again. A low horn echoed through the arena. A signally gate opened across the sand, and from the darkness they came 4 beasts, each twice the size of a horse, covered in muscle and bone, their backs loaded with armored plates, spines sticking out, eyes red and glowing, jaws wide with black teeth. Genetically modified hunters, created only to kill. They stepped out slowly, tails dragging across the ground, their mouths dripping with hunger. The crowd exploded with cheers. They threw meat and bones into the pit. They wanted blood. They wanted a show. Lyra screamed. Her voice cracked. She pulled against the chains, but her arms were weak, her legs already bleeding from the metal cuffs. The first beast sniffed the air. It let out a growl that shook the walls. Then it ran fast, too fast. It struck the post with its shoulder. The whole thing shook. Lyra cried out. The beast stepped back, then slashed at her leg. 3 claws cut through skin. Blood ran down to her ankle. Nobles laughed. Some clapped. Others howled like animals. Lyra fell to her knees. She held her breath. She bit her lip to stop herself from crying louder. Another beast approached. This one took its time. It licked her blood from the sand, then moved behind her. She could feel its breath on her neck. She closed her eyes and whispered a name she had never spoken before, but one she somehow knew. Kale. Then the gate behind her rattled. Not the beast gate, not part of the Showa, different gate. The guards looked confused. The nobles paused out from the shadows. A figure stepped into the arena. Not a Velgrath, not a beast, a man. He was tall, muscles carved like stone, his skin dark and sunburnt, his clothes torn and dusty, a cloak wrapped around his shoulders. But the most powerful thing were his eyes. They were not soft. They were not afraid. They were burning. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He walked 1 step at a time, slow, steady. The beasts turned to face him. One of them growled. Another took a step toward him. He stopped walking and stared at them. The crowd went silent for a moment. Even the wind stopped. The beasts lowered their heads. Then they backed away. The nobles stood from their seats. Guards aimed their weapons, but the man did not stop. He walked past the beasts. He walked to the post. He reached down and lifted Lyra to her feet. Her body shook, but his hands were gentle. He looked into her eyes, and she saw something more powerful than fear, more real than pain. He remembered her, even though she didn't remember him. The chains snapped one by one. He broke them with his bare hands. Lyra fell against him, and he held her like a shield. The guards shouted, weapons charged. The nobles screamed orders, but the man didn't blink. He turned to face the stands and raised one hand. He pointed not at the beasts, not at the guards, at the nobles, at every single one of them, and though he said nothing, his meaning was clear. This was not a game. This was not entertainment. This was revenge. The arena was silent, not because the battle had ended, But because something had changed, the man stood there, one arm holding Lyra, the other still raised at the nobles. He had no weapon, no armor, no army behind him, but fear had already begun to spread. Not among the beasts, not among the slaves, among the Velgrath guards, poured into the pit, each one armed with plasma blades and shock rifles. They shouted at the man to surrender. He didn't move. Lyra opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her body felt weak, but her heart beat faster. There was something about this man, something in his face. She had seen that face in a dream once. Or maybe a memory. The guards circled, weapons pointed. One of them stepped closer and fired. The beam struck the man in the chest. He didn't fall. He didn't scream. He turned his head and stared at the guard who fired. Then he walked toward him. The guard tried again. This time the beam hit his shoulder. Smoke rose from his skin, but he kept walking. Another guard joined in, 2 beams, then 3. The man reached them, grabbed one by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and threw him into the others' bodies. Crashed, weapons flew. The nobles shouted for more troops. They wanted the man dead. They wanted their control back, but something inside the crowd had changed. The slaves in the stands, the workers, the quiet ones forced to clap and cheer. They stopped obeying one by one. They looked down into the arena, at the human who stood without fear, and they remembered something. Hope. The man turned to Lyra, spoke for the first time. "Can you walk?" She nodded barely. He helped her toward the tunnel. The beast stepped aside, still watching him, but no longer moving against him. Behind them, smoke began to rise. Weapons exploded. Screams echoed, not of humans, not of beasts. Velgrath looked back once, then kept moving inside the tunnel. The air was cooler, lights flickered overhead. They passed empty cages, torture rooms, storage halls filled with chains and blood. She turned. "Him, who are you?" He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was older than the stars. "My name is Kale." That name, it struck her like thunder. She didn't know why, but it felt like a word she had always known. Kale led her deeper into the tunnels. They reached a door marked with alien runes. He placed his hand on the panel. The metal hissed and opened. Inside was a chamber, old, dusty, full of broken tech screens, maps, a symbol carved into the wall, an old Earth flag, faded, burnt at the edges. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Is this?" Kale nodded. "It's all that's left." He sat down, pulled out a small device from his coat. It glowed softly. Images flickered. Old photos, a green planet, blue ocean, skies full of birds. Earth. Lyra stared. "I've never seen it." Kale looked at the image. "Neither have I, not since I was 5. She turned to him. "Then how are you still alive?" He sighed. "When they took Earth, they didn't kill everyone. Some of us escaped or were taken, hidden in places they thought we'd never survive. I was dropped on a mining moon. No food, no tools, just cold and rock, but I lived, and I remembered." He paused. His hand closed around the device. "I remembered the screams, the fire, the way they laughed when they took everything. I promised myself I would never forget, and I didn't." Looked up at her. "Neither did you, even if they tried to erase it from you." Lyra stepped back. "I was born here, in the camps. I don't remember anything else." Kale stood. "You remember more than you think. Your blood, your voice, your spirit. It's not Velgrath, it's human." Lyra touched her wrist, where the chains had been. Her skin burned, but the fire inside her burned hotter. "Why did you come here?" Kale walked to the wall, touched the Earth symbol. "Because someone told me you were still alive." Lyra froze. Kale nodded. "They tried to hide you, but rumors spread of a girl with human eyes trapped on a slave planet. Beaten, tied, left for beasts. I couldn't let them finish what they started." Lyra stepped closer, her voice low. "Why do I feel like I know you?" Kale looked into her eyes. "Because you do." He pulled out a small piece of metal, flat, rusty, etched with letters. She read it, her hands shaking. LYR8 was a dog tag, an Earth tag, worn by soldiers, lost children, refugees. "I found it in the ruins." Kale said. "The last camp they destroyed. It was the only thing left that had your name. I kept it, just in case." Lyra's hands trembled. Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain but from something deeper. She wasn't just a slave. She wasn't just a mistake. She was someone. She had a name, and someone had remembered. Kale stepped back, sat down again. pulled a worn cloth from his pack, offered it to her. She wiped her face, then looked at him again. What now? Kale stared at the map on the screen. Now we take back what's ours. Lyra blinked. We're two people. Kale smiled. That's all it takes. He stood again. There are others hiding, waiting. They don't need a war. They need a reason, and you are that reason. Lyra touched the tag again, held it close to her heart. Kale turned off the screen. The room went dark. Only the faint blue lights from outside the tunnel remained. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They thought they broke us. They thought we forgot. But they were wrong. She nodded, tears still in her eyes. What do we do first? Kale looked at her. We remind them what it means to be human. The fire in the chamber had died down, but the warmth between them had not. Kale stood near the door, listening for footsteps, waiting for sirens. Silence. Lyra sat by the edge of the map table, the tag still in her hand. She turned it over, again and again. She wanted to believe. She wanted to say it out loud, that she was more than this place, that she was more than a slave or a mistake. But the fear, it was still there. She looked up at Kale. His back was strong, but she saw the way he carried, his arms covered in scars, his shoulders stiff from too many years without rest. Why me? Her voice was soft, but he heard. I turned around slowly and walked to her side. You were the one they feared the most. She frowned. I was never a fighter. I was always locked away. Exactly. That's why you survived. They didn't want others to see you. They didn't want the slaves to know there was someone like you. Someone with blood from both worlds, someone with fire in her chest and truth in her eyes. Lyra looked away, then back again. Do you think I'm really one of you? Kale stepped closer. He sat beside her. His voice calm. Look at Mesh. What do you see? Lyra stared at him. His face was rough, his beard uneven, his eyes tired. But when she looked closer, she saw something else. Pain, strength, and something that made her chest feel warm. I see hope. He smiled. That's what I saw in you. She blinked fast. Her throat tight. Kale looked at her wrist, where the skin still had marks. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small vial, a golden liquid inside. Let me help. She hesitated, then nodded. He opened it, poured a drop onto a cloth, gently pressed it against her skin. It burned for a second, then cooled. The pain faded. Where did you get this? Kale stared at the cloth. Ancient tech from a lab, hidden under the mines built by humans, stolen by Velgrath. I found it while searching for you. He paused. They were trying to erase everything we were, but they failed. Lyra leaned back. How long have you been searching? Kale looked at her. Too long. Silence settled again, but not the cold kind, the soft kind, like the end of a storm. Lyra reached out, touched the edge of his cloak. You came alone. Kale nodded. If I brought others, they would have died. The guards would have sensed a raid. I needed to move like a ghost, quiet, precise, and I needed to find you myself. Why? Because the others only heard the rumors. I felt something more. I didn't just think you were alive. I knew. Lyra looked down. There was a scar on her palm. She had never known where it came from. But now she remembered a fire, a cage, a hand pulling her out, and a name whispered in the dark. Kale, think we met before? He nodded. We did. You were just a child, barely old enough to walk. I saved you once. And when they took you again, I swore I'd never stop looking. Her hands covered her face. Tears came again, but these tears felt different. They didn't taste like pain. They tasted like memory. Kale stood. He walked to a small crate, pulled out a worn blanket, set it beside her. You need rest. Your body has been through hell. Lyra touched her leg, the skin still tender, but healing. Will you stay close always? She lay down, pulled the blanket over her. It smelled like earth and firewood and something warm. She had forgotten family. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in her life she dreamed of stars. Kale didn't sleep. He watched the monitors. He traced the maps. He studied the guards' patrols. But his mind kept drifting to her face, to the way she looked at him, as if she remembered everything, even if her mind had forgotten. She was more than human, more than Velgrath. She was but a bridge, a key, a spark that could burn the whole dominion to ash. He heard her stir, then her voice soft, afraid. Kale. He rushed to her side. She sat up, her hands shaking, her eyes wide. What is it? He saw something, a place, a white room, lights. And Voices Kale's jaw clenched. Did they experiment on you? Lyra nodded. But it wasn't just pain. They kept repeating one word. Project Genesis. Kale froze. That's not possible. What is Ith? Looked away, then Bap. That was the last hope of Earth. A program to create a new kind of human. One that could survive anywhere. One that could carry the memory of all of us. Even if the rest of us died. Lyra felt her skin turn cold. They said I was a vessel. Kale stood, his voice firm. They lied. You're not a vessel. You're the reason we're still here. You are proof that we can survive. That we can fight back, that we matter. She stared at him, eyes wide. Kalia, stake me with you. He nodded. We leave tonight. The stars above Curax 9 were always distant. But tonight they seemed to tremble. Kale and Lyra stood in the shadow of the old chamber. The entrance now sealed behind them. Dust swirled at their feet as they moved through the underground corridors. Silence was thick, but Kale's mind was louder. Every corner, every hallway, he had memorized it. Each turn, each shadow was part of his plan. Lyra followed behind her steps, unsure. But her eyes were no longer afraid. She carried a torch, small, dim, but steady. Kale stopped near a grated floor panel. He knelt, pulled it open. With bare hands below, a tunnel led beneath the arena. This was how they moved prisoners. This was where they dragged bodies, where the Velgrath dumped the ones they broke. Kale had crawled through here for days, waiting, watching. Now he walked it again, but not as prey. This time he walked as the storm. The arena above was full again. Guards lined the walls. Nobles returned to their seats. They thought the threat had passed, that the strange human had been captured or killed. They were wrong. Beneath the arena floor, Kale emerged through a steel hatch, Lyra close behind. She gasped as she looked up through the cracks in the floor. The same post where she was tied still stood, still stained, still waiting for the next victim. Kale looked at her. You want to leave it there? She shook her head. No. He reached into his belt, pulled out a small device, pressed it into the base of the post. The timer blinked. 30 seconds. They stepped back. A low hum. Sudden burst. The post exploded. Upward metal flew. Fire lit the underdeck. Crowd above screamed. Kale turned to Lyra. Run to the far end. Stay hidden. What about you? And done hiding? He rose from the ground like a ghost from fire. The stands filled with gasps. The nobles leaned forward, confused, angry. Kale walked across the sand. No armor, no weapons, but he didn't need them. First guard dropped from the ledge, weapon raised. Kale didn't stop. The guard swung. Kale stepped inside, caught the arm, snapped it backward. The weapon clattered to the floor. Kale grabbed it, threw it into the crowd. 2 more guards dropped in. Kale ran fast. He grabbed the first by the helmet, slammed his head into the ground. The other fired a bolt of energy. Kale twisted, dodged. A loose chain from the floor, wrapped it around the guard's leg. Pull. The alien crashed down. Kale stomped hard on his chest. The crowd tried to flee, but the exits were sealed. Kale looked up and shouted, "This is not your arena anymore. This is ours." From the shadows, others began to rise. Slaves, forgotten workers, humans in rags. Each one stepped forward, each one armed with scrap tools, rusted pipes, broken blades. They had waited too long, and now the fire was lit. Lyra stood above, watching it unfold, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She saw Kale in the center, a hurricane of rage and justice. She wanted to run to him, to fight beside him. But she knew her part was different. She moved through the tunnels toward the guard tower. Inside, the control room buzzed with lights. Velgrath officers yelled into comms, trying to call for help. She entered through a side hatch. Unseen, she moved like shadow, her feet silent, her body low. A small panel blinked beside her, the master gate switch. She reached for it, then paused. A sound behind her. She turned. A Velgrath soldier, tall, fanged blade in hand. He charged. She ducked, grabbed a metal bar, swung it once, hit his arm. He roared, slashed at her. She dodged, but felt the blade tear her shoulder. Pain shot down her side. She screamed, fell back, but before he could strike again, Kale crashed through the wall. He tackled, the alien fists pounding. He didn't stop. Even when the Velgrath stopped moving, blood spilled across the panel. Kale stood, breathing hard, eyes locked on Lyra. Are you hurt? Just a cut. He nodded, then looked at the switch. It's time. She stepped forward and flipped it. The gates opened, all of them cells, barracks holding pens. The slaves were free across the complex. Doors burst open. Men and women ran out, chains falling. From their wrists, some dropped to their knees. Others picked up weapons. They looked up at the arena, at the sky, and they knew. This was the beginning. The battle raged for hours. Kale fought like a beast. Lyra moved through the shadows, helping others, spreading the fire. The nobles tried to escape, but their shuttles were grounded, their soldiers outmatched. By the end of the night, the sand was red. The sky filled with smoke, and in the middle of the arena Kale stood with Lyra beside him, a broken flag raised. In his hand, the old symbol of Earth. The crowd gathered around, humans, half-breeds, even a few aliens who no longer believed in the Velgrath rule. Kale raised his voice. They thought we would forget who we were. They thought we would break, but today, they remember us. They remember what happens when a human bleeds. Lyra took his hand. Her fingers curled around his, and for the first time, the stars above Kirax 9 did not look so far away. The fires still burned across the ruins of the arena. Smoke twisted into the sky. Ash rained down like snow. But there was no silence, only voices. Voices that had never spoken without fear before. Humans gathered near the center, some wounded, some holding each other, some just standing in awe. They were free, but they didn't know what came next. Kale stood on the upper deck of the tower, looking down, his arms crossed, his jaw set. He had seen too much to celebrate, yet freedom was not a moment. It was a war. Behind him, Lyra sat on a metal crate. A medic wrapped her shoulder. The cut from the Velgrath soldier had been deep, but not fatal. She didn't flinch. Her mind was elsewhere. Something had changed during the fight. Not just the people, not just the balance of power. Something inside her. She kept feeling heat, not from pain but from something under her skin. Something near her collarbone. When she touched it, the spot pulsed. Kale turned around, saw her hand on her neck, still hurting, not pain. It feels like she searched for the word electric. Kale stepped closer. He knelt beside her. Let me see. She moved her collar aside, and there it was, a symbol, faint, shaped like a circle broken by 3 lines, glowing slightly beneath the skin, as if lit from inside. Kale's eyes narrowed. He had seen this before, not in person, but in data, in fragments of the old Earth Resistance archives. His voice was quiet and full of awe. You have the mark. Lyra looked at him. What does it mean? Kale stood. He began to pace, his voice steady. It was a myth, a story passed among the last survivors, that Earth had one final plan before it fell. A program called Genesis, a way to preserve humanity's evolution, to build a future body that could carry everything we were, not just DNA, not just memory, something more. Lyra touched the mark again. Why me? Because your body carries the map to every part of what they destroyed. Kale walked back to her, knelt again. This time closer. You're not just part human. You might be the last creation of Earth science. A hybrid, not half Velgrath, but fully human, in a way the rest of us never reached. She shook her head. That's not possible. I was born in the camps. I was raised like a rat. I don't remember anything from Earth. You wouldn't. They designed the Genesis host to activate only under pressure, under fear, under connection. It makes sense. The mark glowed when I found you, when you stood up. When you fought, something inside you woke up. Lyra's voice dropped. So what now? You want to use me as a weapon? Kale looked her in the eyes. No, I want you to decide what kind of future we build, because for the first time, we have a chance to build something new, not just survive but grow. Lyra looked down at her hands. She remembered them shaking in the arena, tied to the post, covered in blood. Then she remembered Kale's hand reaching out, strong, unshaken. What if I'm not ready? Kale stood slowly. Then we wait. You are not a tool. You are not a prophecy. You are a person, and that is more powerful than any symbol. Later that night, they moved into the old tunnels beneath the outer ridge. It was once a transport hub, long abandoned, now filled with survivors. They lit fires, repaired weapons, shared food from stolen supply ships. Children laughed, old men cried, women sang songs in forgotten tongues. Kale and Lyra sat by a fire, sharing silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because some silences are sacred. She looked at the sky. It was the first time she saw stars without bars in the way. Kale passed her a drink. It tasted like bitter fruit, but warm. She looked at him. Do you remember earth pieces? She leaned forward. Tell me one. Kale stared into the flames. My mother used to cook over fire, real fire, not electric plates. She made something called stew. It smelled like spice and home. I remember that smell. And her hands always warm, always strong. Lyra smiled. I wish I could remember something like that. He looked at her. Maybe you will. She touched the mark on her collarbone again. The glow had faded, but the warmth remained. Do you think there are others like me? Kale nodded. Maybe, maybe not. But we'll find out, and if we don't, then you'll be the first. And that is enough. The next morning, a scout returned from the northern ridge. They found something buried under the ice, a pod marked with earth symbols. Kale and Lyra moved fast. Took a small team. They reached the site by dusk. There, frozen in the cliff, was a cryopedantion covered in frost, but still humming. Lyra stepped closer. She touched the panel. The mark on her skin began to glow again. Kale raised his weapon, eyes scanning the shadows. She placed her hand flat on the pod. It responded. Lights blinked. Systems hummed louder, and then it opened. Steam hissed into the air. The team, but way inside, was a body, not dead, not alive, sleeping. A man wearing earth colors, symbols on his chest, same as Lyra's tag. She stepped forward. Kale stayed beside her. They stared into the chamber, and Lyra whispered, he has the same eyes. Kale nodded. Welcome to the second spark. The cryopod hissed shut behind them, but the air around Kale and Lyra was no longer still. It buzzed, not with electricity, but with something older, something deeper. Hope. The man inside the pod had not woken yet, but his chest rose and fell, slow, even. Kale checked his vitals. He's stable, but it may take time. Lyra stood at his side, eyes on the frozen hills outside. Snow drifted softly across the ridge. She touched the mark on her skin. It glowed again, faint, but alive. You said I was the spark. Then what is he? Kale looked at her. Another flame. They returned to the rebel camp 2 nights later, and everything had changed. Fires burned brighter. Guards walked stronger. Children ran freely through the tunnels. Weapons were being built from scrap radio towers. Repaired voices from other planets, other human cells, other forgotten souls, all calling the same word. Rise. Lyra entered the hall first. Everyone stopped. The room grew quiet. They saw her, the mark glowing at her collarbone, the symbol of Earth stitched onto her chest, and Kale beside her, worn, fierce, unshaken. Someone stepped forward. An old man with white hair and a missing arm. He knelt. Others followed one by one. They knelt before her, not in worship, but in recognition. They knew what she was now. She was more than a girl, more than a prisoner. She was the future and the past, all in one body. Lyra's throat tightened. Her hands shook. She wanted to speak, but her voice caught. Kale stepped beside her, spoke for them both. We will not kneel again. Stand. And they did together. Over the next 7 days, the camp became something more, not a hiding place, not a shelter, a fortress. Lyra spent her hours learning old Earth languages, ancient codes, weapon systems, and maps. But more than that, she listened to every voice, every scar, every dream. She learned their pain, their wishes, their fears, and they began to follow her, not because she demanded it, but because they saw who she really was. A mirror, a fighter. One of them, Kale, watched from a distance, proud, silent, but with a weight in his chest. He knew what was coming, and he was not afraid of war. He was afraid of what it might take from here. On the 8th night, a ship arrived in orbit, large armed Velgrath insignia carved across its wings. It hovered above the atmosphere and sent one message: return the anomaly, or we burn this planet clean. No signature, no warning, just death. Lyra sat with Kale in the war room, her hands curled into fists. They know what I am now. Kale nodded. They always knew, but now they fear it. We have ours, then let's use them. The rebel signal tower lit up. Messages sent across channels once thought dead, to mining colonies, to prison moons, to smuggler ports and abandoned Earth outposts. Come now, this is the moment. Ships answered, not many but enough. Old freighters, hacked shuttles, even smaller craft flown by scavengers. They called it a suicide mission, But none turned back, because Earth had not sent a queen. Or a soldier Earth had sent a girl with human eyes, and they would not let her stand alone. The sky turned red as the first blast dropped from the Velgrath warship. It struck the mountain west of the ridge. The fire shook the camp, dust fell from the ceilings. Children screamed, men ran to the guns. Kale pulled on his armor. He turned to Lyra. Stay. Underground she shook her head. Not this time. He grabbed her arm. Not with anger, with fear. If something happens to you, she placed her hand on his chest, then finish-eyed, stared at her. For the first time he didn't see a symbol or a secret. He saw a woman one. He didn't want to lose. The first attack wave came fast. Drop soldiers fell like rain. Velgrath claws shields. Energy blade scale met them at the north ridge. 10 rebels at his side. His blade cut through armor. His fists cracked bone. He didn't fight for victory. He fought like the world was ending. And maybe it was. Lyra moved through the rear flank, giving orders, pulling wounded, calming the scared. She never stopped moving. She saw a child stuck under rubble. She lifted the stone herself. She saw a rebel bleeding out. She tore her own sleeve to bind his wound. Every life, every scream, she carried it. The battle reached the central gate. Velgrath elites twice the size of Kale, taller than anyone had seen before. One charged at Lyra. Kale saw it too. Far to reach in time, he screamed her name. The world slowed. The elite lifted a plasma axe. Lyra stepped forward, unarmed. She raised her hand, and the mark on her collarbone flared. The air trembled. The ground shook. The elite froze mid-strike. Within its body began to convulse. Sparks, tremors. Its armor cracked. And then it dropped dead. No wound, no blade, just the glow from Lyra's skin. Everyone stopped. Even Kale. She lowered her hand, breathing hard, her eyes wide. What did I just do? Kale walked to her, helped her. Standi, think. You became who you were meant to be, above them. The Velgrath ship adjusted position, preparing for full bombardment. Lyra looked at the sky. We can't stop that from here. Kale stared at the distant glow, then at her. You don't have to. She turned to him, eyes full of fear and trust. Then who will? Kale stepped closer. I will. He pressed a small device into her palm. A beacon, tied to the ship's targeting core. This will blind them, but it has to be placed on their hull manually. That's suicide. Kale smiled. Then it's perfect. She grabbed his arm. Don't. This voice cracked. This is why I trained. This is why I live, to protect what we still have to protect. You. Lyra shook her head, tears in her eyes. Don't do this alone. He leaned in, his forehead touched hers. I never was alone. Then he turned and ran for the hangar. Lyra stood frozen, the fire in the sky above her, burning like her soul. The ship roared overhead, a shadow of steel blocking out the stars. Its weapons lit the sky, red beams, crimson fire, death from the heavens. But down below, in the hangar, a single human climbed into a stolen fighter. Kale sat in the cockpit, hands steady, jaw locked, eyes focused. He powered the engine. A low hum built around him. The screen blinked once, then twice. The hatch opened, and he launched straight toward the monster above. Lyra stood at the base of the ridge, watching his ship climb. Her hands trembled. The wind pulled at her hair, but she didn't move. She knew what he was doing, and she hated him for it, and loved him more for it. Around her, the camp burned, but the people stood, wounded, bleeding, but not broken. They waited, every eye in the camp locked. On the sky they watched one ship, one human fly into fire. Kale dodged the first turret blast, then the second. He flew low, fast, every move counted. He reached the underbelly of the Velgrath destroyer. Its armor was thick, its defenses brutal, but he wasn't trying to destroy it, just blind. I slowed the ship, activated manual control. The beacon blinked in his hand, a soft blue pulse. 1 minute. That's all he needed. He opened the hatch, stepped out. The vacuum pressed against him, but his suit held. He climbed across the top of the fighter, one hand, then another. The beacon clipped to his chest, below him endless sky, above him the death machine that took his world. He reached the ship's hull, placed the beacon. It clicked into place. The light flared, and then he let go. Lyra saw the flash from the ground, a burst of light near the ship's underbelly. The red lights across its body began to flicker, its weapons powered down, its engine coughed once. Then went dark, the sky fell silent, cheers erupted behind. Her humans cried out, screamed her name, screamed his name, but Lyra didn't cheer, whereas No-one answered. She stepped forward looking at the sky, scanning for his ship. Nothing. Her heart dropped then, a flicker, a trail of smoke, far in the distance, falling. Fasty rescue team scrambled. 2 ships launched toward the crash site. Lyra ran to the nearest transport. I'm going with them. You're wounded. I don't care. The crash site was quiet. A forest near the edge of the northern ridge. Fire spread across. The tree's metal cracked, but the cockpit was intact. Rescuers pulled the door open. Smoke poured out. Kale was inside, barely conscious, his suit torn. Blood on his side. But he was breathing. Lyra climbed into the wreck, dropped beside him, took his hand. Stupid, beautiful, stubborn man. He blinked, smiled weakly. Did it work? She nodded. You shut down a battleship with your bare hands. He coughed, then let out a laugh. Not bad for a dead species. They brought him back to camp. People lined the walkways, touched. His arms spoke his name. Some cried, some just watched. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a symbol, but Kale didn't want to be remembered as a weapon. He wanted to be remembered as a man who saved something worth saving. He sat beside the fire again. Same place he sat when he first came to the camp, but this time Lyra sat with him, her head on his shoulder, her fingers locked with his. She didn't say much, didn't need to, because when she looked at him, she didn't see the savior. She saw the boy who once pulled her from fire, the man who stood in front of monsters, the human who remembered her name. Even when the universe had forgotten, the Velgrath didn't return. Not right away. Their ship drifted powerless, their command chain broken, their pride shattered. News of the battle spread fast to other colonies, to other planets, to hidden places where humans still lived. They heard the story of the girl who rose from chains and the man who walked into death. They didn't know every detail, but they didn't have to. They just knew humanity was not gone. It had never been gone. It had just been waiting for someone to remind the stars what happens when you corner the wrong species. Days passed, then weeks. The camp grew stronger. People came from far, some by foot, some by stolen ship. They brought stories, they brought weapons, they brought hope. Kale healed slowly, but his heart healed faster because every morning he woke up to Lyra's voice. Every night he fell asleep to the sound of laughter. Outside, in one afternoon, he took her hand, led her to the edge of the canyon where the sky opened wide and stars blinked without fear. I think this was always meant to happen. She turned to him. What was as he looked at her, and for the first time in his entire life, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt alive because of her. They built a monument, not of stone, not of steel, but of memory, a tower of names. Every human who had ever fallen, every rebel who had ever fought, every whisper that had carried. The fire forward at the top. 2 names stood side by side, Kale, Lyra. Below those names an old earth phrase, till a human remembers, and they did. The universe remembered, because when humanity was hunted, when it was broken, when it was scattered across stars, like ash, it did not fade. It waited, it learned, it evolved, it hid its fire inside one girl, inside one voice. And when the day came, when the world thought they had won, that no human would ever rise again, they tied her to a post, and they laughed as beasts tore at her legs, until a human walked into the fire and reminded them we were never weak. We were only waiting to remember who we are.